I want to welcome you to our fifth in a series of conversations organized by the Val-Kill Partnership, the Open Society University Network, Bard College, and the Telwar Network. My name is Erin Canan. I'm the Dean for Civic Engagement at Bard College, which is located only a few miles away from where Eleanor Roosevelt grew up. I'm joined today by my friend Manuela Roosevelt, who chairs the Val-Kill Partnership, which is a friends group of the National Park Service that preserves Eleanor's home and legacy at Val-Kill in Hyde Park, New York, which is only a mile away from where Franklin Delano Roosevelt grew up. It's my pleasure to serve as the secretary on the Val-Kill Partnership Board and to live so close to the home and retreat, about which Eleanor said, "Val-Kill is where I used to find myself and grow. At Val-Kill, I emerged as an individual." This is a perfect theme for us today as we reflect on culture and leadership. Our board is committed to amplifying Eleanor's legacy, and in the time of COVID, that has ironically been a bit easier. What I mean by that is that Eleanor found a way to light a candle in the dark. She suffered personal, national, and international trauma, and what emerged was optimism, courageous action, and hope. How she managed to unearth that within herself and bring the same out in the people around her, how she managed to amplify unheard voices and to use her platform to reflect her own values compass is something that we, all of us, are seeking now more than ever. Manuel and I have been reflecting on Eleanor's written work over the past few months, and so much of what she wrote is relevant today. The title of our series, Tomorrow is Now, is the title of her last book, where she speaks to the next generation. Perhaps we didn't listen hard enough. About our other sponsors, the Open Society University Network is a partnership between Bard College, Central European University, and Open Society Network, developing academic programs that support students and institutions in civic engagement and academic programs across geographic and demographic boundaries. The Telwar Network is an international association of higher education institutions committed to strengthening the civic roles and social responsibilities of institutions that has resulted in a global movement of engaged universities. Now let me introduce Manuela. Manuela Roosevelt is the chair of the Eleanor Roosevelt Val-Kill Partnership, a private nonprofit that works in tandem with the National Park Service for the enhancement of visitors' experience at the home of Eleanor Roosevelt. The organization funds educational programs, lectures, and has raised more than $2.5 million for the National Park Service to assist in restoration projects at the site. She is the editorial director at Callaway Arts and Entertainment, a publisher and cross-platform media company in New York City. And she lives with her family at Springwood, the estate where Franklin Roosevelt was born and now belongs to the National Park Service. Manuela, I'm going to turn the floor over to you.
Thank you so much, Erin. I want to welcome our honored guest, Dr. Rai, to today's Tomorrow is Now webinar with you all. And I also want to thank the whole team at Bard College because they are simply incredible. So deep thanks to everyone and welcome everyone again or for the first time if you're joining us for the first time. So we have students coming from 370 colleges or more by now and from all time zones and from many, many, many countries. And I think you'll be happy with listening to Dr. Rai's global view of values. So as Erin explained, Tomorrow is Now is the title of Eleanor Roosevelt's last book, which she dictated literally from her deathbed. And she wanted it to be a call to action and a manifesto for the younger generation with more tomorrows ahead of you than yesterday's. She was adamant that tomorrow is now were her last words to the world, her last ideas and concepts that she hoped would inspire the next generation to bold action and strong commitment to shape society by getting involved and abandoning complacency. Today, we're very, very fortunate to have Dr. Rai with us. She is in London currently, where she lives. She is the author of the bestseller, The Values Compass. Mandeep Rai is a global authority on values, working with companies, institutions, and individuals around the world. She has traveled to more than 150 countries and reported as a journalist for the BBC World Service and Reuters, amongst others. She began her career in private banking at JP Morgan and later worked for the United Nations, the European Commission, and grassroots NGOs before setting up the UAE's first media venture capital fund. She studied philosophy, politics, and economics, has a master science in development from the London School of Economics, and completed an MBA from the London Business School with a year at Harvard and MIT. She also holds a PhD in global values. Welcome, 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 Dr. Rai. I'm going to start with a quote by Mahatma Gandhi that opens your extraordinary book. And that actually has been a favorite quote of mine, attached to the bottom of my private emails for the last 5 years. The quote is, "Your beliefs become your thoughts. Your thoughts become your words. Your words become your actions. Your actions become your habits. Your habits become your values. Your values become your destiny." So Mandeep, what struck me the most about reading your extraordinary book are the similarities between your worldviews in terms of values with the work of Eleanor Roosevelt, who emphasized that it was values and individual and collective actions that reflect those values that have the power to bring deep change into the world. So at the beginning of the book, you tell us that values work away in our subconscious and steer our decision-making that affects us both personally and in the way we interact with others. Would you like to say something about the values in our subconscious collectively and socially and individually?
Absolutely. Yes. Firstly, thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure and joy to be here. You said that you had that quote at the bottom of your email for the last 5 years. Is that correct?
Yes.
It was part of your signature. That says everything in terms of your subconscious, because as you know, words permeate and create our reality. And so the fact that you would be sending out this message quite literally again and again, multiple times a day, day after day, over 5 years. And then it's no coincidence that we're here talking about exactly that I'm talking to university students, because actually they're the ones whose values have just been formed and they still have a choice as to which values they focus on. So let me take you back 3 or 4 or 5. Something might have happened where you thought, I'm not sure I'm getting something right to be accepted. When you're about 13, a moment arrives where you think, I'm not sure I belong here. Again, another change might take place where you make it decided that either it's in your toolkit and it helps you succeed, or it's something that hinders you and therefore you throw it away. And without you even realizing, you are forming a set of values. Now, these values then go on to frame your decisions. So, for example, if you have made, perhaps, let's say, some people, integrity is so important that if they're lied to just once, either in an institutional context or in a relationship or at work, that's it. They would walk out of that situation, not to return. So in that instance, you think, you're holding integrity such that it is one of the most important values for you. Often this happens with the second child in the birth order. Justice might be really important. Maybe you always felt like you were number 2 and you always want to feel that you're as equal as the first child that was born. So what I'm showing you is that moments happen that shape your values, but that is something that's happening as you're nurtured. But there are also some values that are in your nature, that regardless of how you were brought up, and often in a family you'll find that 2 or 3 or 4 siblings are brought up in a very similar way, and yet right from the get-go they had very different natures. So there are other values that are inherent in your nature. The reason I'm talking to you about nature and nurture is because although now at the age of 18, 19, 20, as you're hearing this, although you might think these things are set, they're not. They are active decisions. You can decide at this point what is most important to you and why that's the case. And essentially, the book is an active journey. It helps you decide, choose. I'd rather use choose actually than decide. Decide, semantically speaking, is almost like you're killing other options. We're not killing other options. It's not that you can't turn to other values at different times. But imagine you have a treasure trove of values within you. I take you through over 101, but there are many, many, many values to choose from. And what I do is help you figure out from all those values, what are we going to choose, as in what can we get down to being your top 5? And then if you had pegged them all equally, it's very difficult to make decisions. So for example, people often find themselves at a tussle often when they're thinking about work. Is work just as important as family? If it's just as important, then isn't it always hard to think about, well, do I take a job that's going to take me further away from my family? Or do I take a job where I have less and less time for my family? So if things are always pegged equally, if your top values are always pegged on equal footing, decision making becomes hard. However, if you prioritize your top 5, and I ask you to choose just 5 because too many becomes overwhelming and too few doesn't give you the sense of balance. But if out of those 5, you prioritize those 5 so that you have a number 1, that's your focus for a particular period of time, and a number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, then decisions become easier to make. And it's not by coincidence that the Dalai Lama said after reading the book that this book will lead you to greater success, fulfillment, and happiness. It's because when decisions are coming from a place that you have, rather than your values kind of ruling you subconsciously, you've made an active choice, then it becomes much easier to make those micro and macro decisions in life. One way of being able to do this, I take you through different techniques in the book, but one technique would be if I ask you to almost think about your eulogy. You're a long way away from that. However, if you think about it now and you think about what you most admire or what you would most like to be known as or known by, and you think about the people, the heroes, the role models that you look up to, that you think of in an aspirational way, already you're getting closer to the values that are important to you, and already you're getting closer to what you would like to live by. A very deep at 9 a.m. in the morning for a Wednesday morning, but here we are. You asked me.
Yes, well, it's a wonderful, let's say, framework that reflects the who you are with what you do. So it marries the inner world to your action world, to your presence in the world. And of course, His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, would say you would be successful in that because then you channel directly. There's no conflict between who you are and what you do. So in your book, you write, over the last 20 years, across a career that began in investment banking and shifted into venture capital, international development and broadcast journalism, I have traveled to over 120 countries. I'm getting a sort of job envy feeling here. This journey has opened my eyes to how values define behavior, relationships, and cultures all over the world. Reporting for Reuters and the BBC World Service, I have seen up close how values shape the life of a country and its people. Every time I visited a new country to report, I was struck by the same realization. Wherever you go, there is something apparent yet unspoken, a sort of cultural language that dictates so many aspects of everyday life. You notice it on the streets, in the cafes and shops, in business meetings, around kitchen and dining tables, and simply while working your way across the towns, villages, and cities. You see it from how a country responds to major events, to how individuals and local communities interact. Based upon these observations, you have created a fascinating and very thought-provoking world map, assigning an individual value to each country and grouped countries into 5 large sections, each defined by an overarching value. I don't know whether we can show the table of contents. Perfect. So, Mandeep, do you want to lead us through the 5 big sections and then how you came up with these absolutely wonderful and thought-provoking values for each country. We go from hope to efficiency to exploration to influence and many more. And how do we use your book in terms of geopolitics and a new global view?
I'd love to. So having worked for over 20 years in the media, I can tell you that if I asked you to say something positive about Paraguay or Papua New Guinea or Peru, you might not be able to do that so easily. And the reason being that actually the media, just like at the moment we're hearing a lot about the pandemic, you hear about the disasters, the catastrophes, what's gone wrong. And yet, you know as well as I do that when you visit any new place, or indeed when you even step out of the front door, you have a choice as to whether you look up, you look around, or you look down. And when you look around and you allow yourself to absorb the social, political, cultural, geographical, historical context, there is in fact such incredible beauty. The fact is that I think that humanity overall wants to evolve into its very best self. It is just almost Darwinian theory. It's not just survival, it's about evolvement and growth and wanting to blossom, so to speak. But how each and every person blossoms is very much determined by the context that they're in. So, for example, in Chile, or Chile, depending on how you say it, it's in South America, that strip of a country, just in the fact that it has that huge Atacama Desert, the fact that it's situated right next to the sea and literally, the whole length of it has a strip of sea around it. The fact that you're almost at the end of the earth, the fact that you're so far removed from, the kind of metropolises or the major metropolises of the world. All these things mean, the geographical kind of pointers that I've just pointed out, mean that you have a sense of perspective. I remember looking up at the night sky, and I've never seen stars the way I saw them there. And the reason being that the atmosphere is so clear, the winds that blow clean air, and with the Atacama there's no light pollution. You just see the night sky in a way that you almost begin to realize that you are a tiny, tiny, tiny speck of light, just like all those other stars. And that sense of perspective naturally seeps into your everyday being there. Whereas if I take you to somewhere like Japan, where you see the way respect permeates every part of that society. So for example, even in kindergarten, you are taught, wet or muddy or soiled, put them in a particular place, put on your indoor shoes, fold your umbrella in a certain way so that it doesn't drip onto the floor and so that it's mindful of the space that it takes and it doesn't disturb the other children, and so on and so forth. Whether it's the way the Shikasen, the train service, will always leave on the time that's stated, or whether it's the way people bow and show respect, you see respect through the way people work with one another, through the way that they move through the streets, that you can't help but be struck by, what if we respected our elders in the same way?
Wonderful.
What if we showed as much consideration for their value of respect? And so as I take you through the world and just, almost be a fly on the wall of each of these societies, book, I kind of leave you with the question of, what if you, for example, with Rwanda, where the focus is on cleanliness, what if you started your day with a clean slate every time? That every morning you forgive anyone you might have hurt the day before, and ask, and kind of within yourself, ask for forgiveness and clear the slate. Clear your desk every morning before you start your day. Just start knowing that all you have, everything else is gone, and all you have is today. That sense of cleanliness and clarity then that permeates through your life. The point of each of these values in the geopolitical context that I'm exploring is, what value can it add to your life? Now, I love the fact that we are talking to really the leaders of tomorrow in this conversation. And I don't mean this in a terrifying way, I mean this in an optimistic way. The leaders of tomorrow, as in you guys, have on your shoulders the opportunity to not just stand for or protect humanity, but essentially stand for all of life. That is what's in question in the 21st century. Within 10 years, we know that the climate and the situation could be so drastically different. And to have kind of radical optimism that together we can do that, and I will take you through the values that will help us do that, that's the kind of hope that we can get from seeing each of these nations in each of these categories that we talk about. So for example, when I take you through change values, change is something that we've really experienced a lot of recently, but it's so much more easier to navigate when we have hope. And I could talk about hope in a dry way, or I could talk about hope in the way that Ghana shows this kind of drastic hope. Ghana attracts more of its diaspora from around the world to come back and invest in Ghana, but not just to invest in Ghana, but to almost transform Ghana again and again and again. It doesn't necessarily have a brain drain, but those that have left, who have gained skills elsewhere or have contributed elsewhere, seem to come back and with this invigorated sense of hope, come back and contribute. Also, you see this in the president, who after losing, or it was a near miss in terms of he would never get the election. For 3 times he tried and never get it. And it was a symbol of hope in the sense that he carried on until he got there. This kind of, change is easy. Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry, did I?
So we were very lucky that the president of Ghana visited Eleanor Roosevelt's home about 3 or 4 years ago. And he brought all his women ministers, and we had a wonderful feast. So I love and encourage all of us. Actually, this is a wonderful exercise to consider all of these values on a personal level as well, which was going to be my next question. So this could be a wonderful game or wonderful meditation for each of us, and particularly for our students. I want to say that the chat room has opened, and so if you want to start posting your questions on the to the chat, then we'll open it up in a few minutes as well. So today we are at a juncture where values that dominated the past are being subverted, and old paradigms seem to no longer reflect the values of the tomorrow's now generation. Can you tell us what you see is shifting today that will affect the future the most?
Yes, I'd love to. I was kind of veering towards that in my last question, but thankfully I didn't answer it because so there has been a phenomenal shift over the course of this year. The changes that have been made in these last 25 weeks could have taken 25 years. For example, the shift from competitiveness towards collaboration. What I mean by that is, if companies, we are respecting organizations and companies that are willing to collaborate for the greater good, and connecting their medical supplies, or looking after only themselves. So for example, with the vaccine, if we can create for all, and that takes collaboration, they're the organizations we will respect. We're respecting, increasingly realizing that we're valuing compassion and community and collaboration, but also creativity much more. So we've had to be extremely creative in how we navigate our lives. And in one very fundamental way, we have almost put aside civil liberty, or our economy, or any of those other big values that we had in order to get go. From the moment this pandemic hit, there was a complete shift in our values. And I think this is here to stay. I think that we will, from henceforth, actually want to work in a more collaborative, communicative, compassionate framework than was the case before.
Absolutely. I mean, this time has certainly emphasized togetherness. We've been thrown together, and we have to pull through together. We know that by collaborating across many sectors of society to get through this pandemic and the devastation it has brought to us. So it's challenging and positive. Now, my question before we open up to questions from the students is, you have been so remarkably successful and so well traveled and written this absolutely pivotal book that I think will be used again and again by individuals and corporations across the world. What is next for you? What are your dreams? What would you like to do?
So as I answer that question, I'm going to ask us to focus on time for a moment. I don't believe time is linear, as in I don't believe I've done X and now I will do Y. And the reason I say that is because even for the students that are listening, the way the book works is that I ask you to look at a particular point of time. So for example, it could be the next decade, it could be whilst you're a student, it could be whilst you're in your first year or in your final year, or whatever it be, that period of time, and you choose a set of values for that particular set of time. And then you realize that how you spend your time, as in how you spend your morning, will reflect your values. How you spend your week, day, month, and year will reflect your values. See that when I think about what's next, I don't think of it as in I've done X and now I'll do Y. I think of it as in coming from a place of my values, what will then resonate? And actually, I'm not sure I can answer that question, honestly speaking, because I think it depends on what comes up and then how I respond to it. And I can't predict or say that, but I can tell you that this has basically opened up many avenues that I would never expect. For example, when I was writing it, I never thought I'd be sitting here speaking to yourselves. And I hope that one day I'll be able to do this in person with you, because I do think that there's that more than it's a business leadership book, but more than any other kind of market or segment of population, it is really a book for young people who are just about to start, because more than any other part of the demographic, people who are coming out of university are making more conscious and more aware choices than ever before, in terms of the type of work they do, in terms of even the products they buy, in terms of who they interact with, what they read, what they listen to. They are consciously doing this from a place of their values. They're willing to spend 55% more for an item or a good that is having positive social or environmental impact. It just shows that level of kind of awareness that I don't think was present even in my generation, which is my generation or the generations before. So I think that there's this sense of radical optimism, kind of the most aware generation than we've ever had.
That's
and I'm
wonderful.
excited to be part of that. I think I'm excited to work with that generation.
You are a true ambassador to Eleanor Roosevelt's legacy. Radical positive attitude was one of the most remarkable traits that she left in her legacy to us. So now it's time to open up our time together to questions from students. The first one is, how did you decide to address the questions of values? How did all this come about?
How did this all come about?
In your life, in your professional life, and how did you decide to write a book about values?
Originally, when I was reporting, in terms of all the travels that I did, I would, after my either television report or written report or radio report, I would write back to my loved ones, to friends and family, and say what moved me, what struck me about each and every place that I went to. And these emails would be passed from one person to another, to another, to another. And I'd get kind of a response from people that I didn't even know. And they'd say, one day this must go into a book. So I think that was seeded kind of very early on. But I didn't know that, I always thought I would do it when I retired, frankly. And then whilst at business school, I began to become even more involved in values. We created at Harvard Business School and London Business School, we created an MBA oath, which then became the Global Business Oath. And essentially, we were talking to the stakeholders, well, the shareholders of companies, and saying that if they came from a place of their values, what a radical shift that would be. And if they considered all the stakeholders within society, actually the organization would inevitably be working for greater good. And that this would actually affect positively the bottom line also. And so increasingly, I began to realize the kind of value of values, so to speak. And then it didn't really all come together until I was pregnant until I was having my first child. And I was at the BBC, and one of my colleagues, one of my very good friends, said, you know that book you were thinking of writing, maybe this is the moment. maybe this is the moment you could write kind of letters to your unborn child, almost like wisdom from around the world. My son's now 9 years old. So I started this in the pregnancy. And as I began to look at it really closely, I began to realize that actually each of those letters were talking about a different value. And then I went on to go and get a doctorate in the subject, because it all required, to give it the depth and the kind of richness that I wanted to, actually required a lot more research than I had under my belt at the time. So after a PhD and after a lot more, many iterations, it finally came out at the beginning of this year.
Wonderful. So
it's been a journey.
That answers also the second question. The question is when did you start to understand your work as a values-centered approach in business school? And was there a moment in your travel that this idea began? It was the hormonal storm of pregnancy and your friend's good advice. So it's a wonderful, wonderful thing that you have created here, a child and an extraordinary book. Another question is, in what ways can we reimagine the future as we think about our values?
Wow, in what way can we reimagine the future? I absolutely love that question, because I think that similar to your question of what's next, I think it's a combination of design and then visioning and imagining. As I look at the education system right now, I'm grateful for those institutions such as your own, which teaches kind of critical thinking, curiosity, to be able to think, not necessarily answer the question. Because when we're designing or when we're thinking about imagining the future, we will be dealing with problems that we don't even know are problems, or trying to come up with solutions for problems that don't even exist right now. And this is because things are moving at such a great speed. So for example, with my children, now I have two, with them, if I teach them coding or a particular type of language, or coding language or something, I'm pretty sure that within 10 years, by the time they're graduating from university, those languages might not even exist. And yet, if I teach them to be really empathetic and aware and creative in their thinking, then no matter what comes in the future, they'll be able to handle it. So in terms of reimagining the future, I think if we have all our antennae open and out, similar to the observations of the cultures that I speak of, if we're just always observing and absorbing, then those reflections of reimagining, which are happening all the time, will be much more astute than anything I could possibly say to you right now.
Wonderful. What has been your favorite country to visit, travel-wise or value-wise? And do you have a post-COVID-19 destination in mind? And we have quite a few. We have a lot of questions coming in.
Okay, great. I'm glad we have lots of questions. Okay, favorite country to visit. I'm not being politically correct when I say it's like choosing a favorite child. You can't, or it's like choosing a finger out of your four fingers. I deliberately in the book choose something positive and brilliant about each nation, because I don't think one nation is either more important or more of my favorite. And I'm really not just trying to be diplomatic here. That's genuinely what I think. If I were recommending somewhere for people to visit, I would say to visit the countries that, because normally that's the subtext of this question, where do you suggest we go? I would say to visit the countries that you think might be changing. Are the Maldives going to disappear? Is Cuba going to radically change? So many countries are going through transformation, and sometimes that transformation is good and sometimes it's not so good. So if there's a country you've idolized or wanted to visit and it's going through some kind of change, I would try and get there before it changes if you can. In terms of what's on my list of countries to visit, I deeply wish to visit places like Namibia and Botswana, and even Libya and Algeria, some places in Africa that I hadn't had the opportunity to go to so far. And I actually went through, I'm glad you said when the pandemic is over, because I really tried this summer. I tried so much that I went as far as Mallorca, because Algeria is just a short boat ride from Algeria. When I learned that the British Embassy wasn't giving visas, I thought, what else can I do? Oh, there are no flights? What else can I do? So I really, really tried. But still, it seems like Africa for the moment is closed, and rightly so. So I'm waiting.
Right. The next question is complex. How do you manage your own values when there seems to be conflict with someone else's values? How do we negotiate that conflict? How do we manage across cultures as we have empathy for voters and stay true to our own values?
I love that question. I'm very grateful for that, because I think this is goes right to the heart of the point of the book, which is actually unity and being able to understand the other as well as understanding ourselves. I think this is actually when the book really began for me. It was when I was 18, and I had been awarded a place at the University of Oxford, and my mother said, please choose anywhere but Oxford. And her set of values, although she wanted this best for me, how she defined that, or what her set of values was different to my own. So I was valuing, and still do value, curiosity, intellectual enlightenment, freedom, exploration. And she was valuing, and still values stability, family, tradition, and being connected to your roots. And so when she said, please choose anywhere but Oxford, I thought, this is my mother. I know she's coming from a different cultural context. She was born and raised in India, and I know she has different concerns to my own. But ultimately, at least in her tradition, and therefore my tradition, you're taught that your parents are next to divinity, as in after, the universal power, kind of your parents are your guiding star. So I couldn't turn her request down. And it's similar to, I think, having maybe a manager who comes from a different culture or whatever. We're always going to come across, you might have a partner who thinks differently or has different values. We're always going to come across people with different set of values. And you have to make a choice. Do you follow theirs, or do you follow your own? And the reason I say the book began there is because I began to realize, as soon as I turned down Oxford, I thought, wow, I actually just followed. I put my own values aside. And after that, I think I've made an active choice to really be aware of who or when or in what circumstances I put my values aside. So for example, in work, when I become clear that, or if I become clear that my day-to-day work is actually, then if I can't change the context or the circumstances I'm in, then I change where I work. Because I think you're, again, to that point of how you're spending your time is what your life then becomes, is what you're then known for, is the legacy you're leaving. Life is too short, I think, to compromise too many times for what you really believe in.
So absolutely, and sometimes that compromise is painful to our hearts and souls. It goes very deep. Next question. What are your top 5 value choices? And if someone, for instance, at the United Nations is designing artificial intelligence, what top values would you hope they chose?
Wow. I love the way students, similar to the ones I had when I was 18. Exploration, freedom. So exploration, I say, is synonymous to Portugal in the book. Freedom, family.
2 more.
Connection. And you'd think that this rolls off my tongue, but actually, I think the pandemic has changed my value. Or like compassion, stroke service. Being serviceful.
All right.
What do I think?
AI.
AI. As in the United Nations, you said.
Or any, AI is now going to be part of our tomorrow. So what cluster of values would you recommend to someone who was developing radical AI?
I think one of the major blind spots within AI is kind of diversity and ethics, especially diversity. So what we're finding is that if you're that there's kind of some natural bias or inbuilt bias, and that really has to be eradicated if we're truly talking about an equitable society that's good for all, and we're really talking about the benefits of diversity. Then it has to start with AI, because AI is so rapidly being embedded in all parts of our functioning, whether we're selected for a program or what every order we make, everything we do is kind of is being impacted by AI. And I think if it can really get equality and diversity and equity right, we'll be in much better hands.
Wonderful. The next one is a very touching question. Radical optimism can be very difficult when you're suffering or when others are suffering. How do you find it when you're not feeling optimistic?
I don't think we have a choice. Where does not being optimistic lead you? It leads you not moving. It leads you kind of stuck. And given the timeframes we're looking at, whether you're doing it to help another, or whether you're doing it because everybody needs it or the planet needs it, I think we have no choice but to be radically optimistic. I agree with you. It's not easy, or it's not always how we feel, or even what sense would suggest, because if you were to read any newspaper or even just open your eyes at the moment, it feels like a tsunami of reasons not to be optimistic. But if there's just one reason to be optimistic, or one thing that you can find to be grateful for, even the fact that you just were able to open your eyes, or that there's sun coming in from the river outside and it's reflecting the sun, or that there's just one thing, that is the thing to focus on. Because all you need is a tiny spring in your step, and then you'll move, and then all the other reasons will come follow.
That's right. So sometimes, in darkness, we need to switch on a light. And it may seem the most difficult step to take, particularly if the darkness is very deep and one is suffering very much. But that's the first step, and it may be the hardest, but the most important steps. So we hope that whoever asks this question can take that step, and you'll be supported.
You're so supported. Yes, I'm just going to say that when you take that one step, and if that step is, and I so applaud the person who asked that question, because even in just asking that question, you're one, asking for a fraction of support. And I just think putting your hand out, you'll be amazed at how many hands come back forward. So kudos to you.
The next question is hopeful question. How is the values of love and agape interwoven in your book? So the emotions.
I would say almost throughout the whole entire book, that emotion and love is interwoven. It's I don't think it's I hope you don't find it to be a naive book, because if anyone were to step foot outside or travel, I hope that you will also know what I'm talking about when I talk about the hospitality of Turkey, or that sense of kind of love in Brazil. But it's not compartmentalized only to Brazil. This love or agape, or all the different, the Greek, all the different words that Greece has, or the Greek language has for love. I think the book is almost languages of love. It is languages of being able to understand yourself and other. So whether that's a form of empathy, whether that's a form of service, whether it's commitment, whether it's just being true to your word so that the other person isn't let down, whether it's all love. So I think it's without wanting to, you have to phrase these things, you have to frame them in a way that they will, if the title had said languages of love, of course there are titles that say that, or if the title had just said love, then I think a different clientele would have picked up the book. But given the fact that the actual title is not just the values compass, It is what 101 countries teach us about purpose, life, and leadership. And that alone, I think, is speaking about love, because it's about that purpose is love, life is love, and leadership is love.
Wonderful. I think students are fascinated by your career. The next question is, why did you shift to reporting after finance? And how do those things influence your work now? So finance and journalism and world travel reporting.
So I'm going to be very honest in that I think I've had almost 3 or 4 careers simultaneously. So yes, there was finance, as in we spoke about JP Morgan, and then I went on to work in venture capital, and now I'm an investor and an advisor and work with many startups. So that kind of finance business aspect and the MBA, etc., has always been part of my work. Then there's a part of international development. Hence, we were talking about SOAS and the London School of Economics, and working for the UN, the EU, and lots of NGOs. I still continue to work in the space of international development. Then there's the space of media and broadcast journalism, and not just reporting for others, but I've actually worked in every medium platform, or whether it be print or TV or social media or whatever. And now, most recently, I guess, a thought leader, author, speaker, etc. Now, I don't want to say gone are the days that you choose one career, but it is possible, and it is so possible now more than ever before, to have a portfolio career. So as well as those 4 strands, I work on boards. I'm a non-executive and executive director on boards. And I think just the more you gather, the more you're able to contribute. So my focus has not been, am I leaving finance, or am I now a broadcaster? That's not the hat I'm choosing to put on myself. My question to myself is simply, where can I contribute the most? Where can I make the biggest impact within what I can do? And I think if that's what I'm led by, then actually there's a very sequential narrative to what I've done and why I've braided those different paths together.
Yeah, I love this concept of your professional life as a portfolio of careers and professional roles, because I think that again reflects how you have been led by your values in a number of investments, of personal investments in different fields, and how enriching that is. It brings diversity, it nourishes your curiosity. And I think particularly the generation of tomorrow's now is better equipped than ever before in history to actually develop that kind of rainbow range of professional possibilities. Next question, how do we not get cynical about the conflict between values and capitalism? So capitalism is, on the one hand, is being lauded more than ever. It's the one and only thing that will rescue society and its differences. And on the other hand, we know that it also has created enormous chasms in the tapestry of society.
A really great question. I just want to finish one thing about the last question, and just wanted to say actually that this pandemic has allowed and will allow, like, we are not going to go back to how we were working before. There have been seismic changes, and now that schism is it's not possible to jump back. And actually, one of the benefits of this pandemic in the working world is the fact that if you're working in a myriad of ways. You're not just working in an office with one job, but you're potentially working on lots of different platforms, and therefore you will be able to juggle a variety of things that you're interested in. And this brings me on to the second question about capitalism, or the following question about capitalism. There are many different levels of capitalism. So if, for example, you feel like you're in a capitalist structure, but that doesn't meet your values, where I work, where you are literally deliberately looking for investment opportunities that are making a social positive impact. And actually you find that when you're looking for those opportunities, you're not compromising yourself. You're not going to earn less or make less money for the organization, or not be able to meet kind of your profit and loss balance sheets. And you're making just as much, in fact, if not more, by looking at this. That brings me back to the kind of my first point about people being willing to spend 55% more on an organic or a fair trade or on a good that's kind of ethically and socially and environmentally well produced. So if you imagine that as we're becoming more aware of how we're spending or how we're investing or how we're buying, etc., then the businesses also have to reflect that. There's only so many times if you go into a store and you say to the shopkeeper or to the assistant, you know, who are the suppliers? How is this made? Is this made fairly? Are people rewarded fairly? There's only so many times they're going to ignore that question or say, sorry, we don't know. At some point, the management are going to say, well, this is important to our customers. We do have to face these questions and we do have to answer them. So I hear the cynicism, but I think that we're not just, you know, it's ironic that this is today and we're talking about tomorrow, like the title of this series. We're talking about today, and you guys are tomorrow's future, but very quickly, you are shaping your organizations. If I think about the startups that I'm involved in, they are created by millennials, they're for millennials, and they are solving millennial problems. So you truly are the pioneers of your world, and you don't need to worry about, or don't need to feel confined by these structures that were made by archaic beings, frankly, because they're not your structures. Don't be confined by it.
Next question. What was the first country you visited?
Oh, the first country I visited. Well, I am a British Indian, as in I'm third generation Indian in Britain. And so given the fact that I live in England, the first country that I visited was at the age of 11 on a school trip to France, it being our neighbor. And actually we drove through France in order to go to Spain. And I can actually recount each and every minute of that 3-day trip. I can tell you what I ate, who I spoke to, how I felt. It was so mind-blowing to me because it was so different to my normal. It was so different to what I was familiar with. And so after that, I said to my parents, you know, everyone sees me as Indian or Pakistani or brown or foreign. I need to know what India is like. I need to visit. And so at the age of 14 was the second country I visited, and that was India, or the third, technically. And then I realized that no one in India thinks I'm Indian. So no one in Britain thinks I'm British, and no one in India thinks I'm Indian. So yeah, that was an awakening.
Wonderful. We have 1 minute, 2 questions. Did you seek out work that had a travel component with travel? Was that a passion that led to specifically look for work with a travel component?
The short answer is yes. Initially, my first job, I was looking for financial freedom, as in I needed to make sure I could support myself so that I could then do what I wished to do. And then as soon as I was able, yes, this is going to sound, I don't know how this is going to sound, and maybe I shouldn't say it, but I was going to say, to me, I always thought death is marriage is synonymous with death. Like, you're young, single, 3 years are over. So my aim was simply to see all of the world or all of life or live everything and do everything before that moment. So yes, I actively sought out opportunities and work that would allow me to do that.
Wonderful. The last question is, what career advice would you give to
Thankfully, marriage is not death.
Only when you're very young, it could look like an entombment. What career advice would you give to someone who wants to travel?
What career advice? That as much as travel is important for you, think about where you want to contribute. Because actually, I found that the opportunities to travel were limitless. I was able to travel through journalism, but I was also able to travel through international development. Travel were very different. I was lucky in that I worked in the Middle East. I didn't just visit the Middle East for business. So when I set up the venture capital fund, I was living in Abu Dhabi, and it was my remit to explore the rest of the Middle East. But if, for example, I'm not saying you shouldn't become a management consultant, but if you become a management consultant in order to travel, and then you find actually you're just going from your office in New York to your office in Buenos Aires and then back on a plane again, you might feel a little frustrated if that's the reason you're doing it. Or, as I know many air hostesses or many people in the travel industry often took a job in travel because they wanted to travel and then found the same thing which, you know, I have a pilot's license, and I know many pilots who fly the plane, have literally either 36 hours or 24 hours or 12 hours in which they're recovering to then fly the plane back. That might not be the kind of travel that you actually want to be doing. So I think about where you want to contribute. It could be to developing nations, or it could indeed be business, but a different type of business. It could be in property, or it could be in pharmaceuticals. Think about the industry first, and then the travel component you can also create, but think about where you want to contribute first.
Wonderful. Well, we're so thankful our time together is coming to an end, and we are absolutely thrilled to have had this hour with you. It's been very enlightening, very fascinating, and your book is extraordinary. It's one of those books that I will keep by my bedside for a long, long time. So thank all of you who have joined today. Thank also to our BARD colleagues and OSIM and the Talwar Network colleagues. And we'll see you next month. Thank you again, and be well, Dr. Rai from London. Thank you. Bye for now.
Thank you for making this happen. Thank you for all your energy and your input. And if anybody wants to reach out, feel free to. I'm here to pay it forward, just like you have paid it forward for me. So thank you.
Wonderful. Bye.